Welcome to Sports in the 607, where we talk games people play. Here's your host, Bob Michaels.
Greg Fargo, it has been quite some time since you and I have actually seen one another, and especially in person, but I want to thank you for joining us today on this edition of Sports in the 607. And for those who are newly acquainted or maybe haven't caught up with any of our episodes, it's called Sports in the 607 because that's where I have done most of my broadcasting as far as this region is concerned. And I want to go back and we'll talk a little bit about some highlights, and there are quite a few highlights in your journey, Coach. But Greg and I met prior to the start of the 2002 hockey season at Elmira College, and we got an opportunity to do multiple interviews, whether as a player or as a coach there, and we'll get into that. But background for you, you grew up very briefly on shall we say, a widely known plateau known as Wolf Island. Take us back to those days, and how did that evolve into Kingston?
Yeah, well, great to be on with you again, Bob, and to see you in this capacity. But yeah, Wolf Island is a place where I spent my earliest years growing up, and it's a place where my father grew up through his childhood and the early parts of being a young adult, and so my parents and I were able to grow up there, and then shortly thereafter moved to Cornwall, Ontario, just down the road, a couple hours, but we're there in Cornwall before moving back to Kingston. So we're a little bit, we've bounced around a little bit as a family back in those years, and all in Eastern Ontario, but Wolf Island's a special place that we go and visit quite often, even still today.
When did it happen that you appeared on the Soaring Eagles recruiting radar? How did it happen?
Yeah, so I was playing junior hockey at the time, playing for the Kingston Voyageurs, Junior A. At the time, it was the Provincial Junior A League, and I remember, I think it was my second or third year there with the V's, and being introduced to, at the time, the assistant coach, Aaron Saul, after one of our games. At the time, he had shown some interest in myself and a couple of my teammates, but just through the recruiting process, got to know Aaron quite well. Had an opportunity to come down and visit Elmira College. So be it. It was an alumni weekend. I remember where the team had played against RIT, a big rival of theirs, and it was just a wonderful atmosphere. And truthfully, it was the visit experience, meeting the coaches, meeting some of the players on the team, and the relationship that was budding between myself and the coach at the time. I think that made it feel like home. So. There were a lot of things that led me to Elmira, both academically and athletically, but ultimately it just felt like a great fit from the start.
Well, for you, for the sake of fans who have not met Greg Fargo but may have seen him from afar, you cut your teeth as a collegiate hockey goalie. Were you always a goalie? Were you primed that way to get into the sport?
I wasn't always a goalie, no. Like a lot of players, started as a young age, on skates by 3 and doing some power skating, I guess, in those early years, and that eventually led to a short career as a skater, as a forward or a D, whatever the coach wanted to have me as that day, but. I remember going to school, and one of my close friends was a goalie, and I was just enamored by it. I was enamored by how he talked about it, the big saves that he would make. The equipment was really appealing to me at the time, and of course I wanted to give it a try. And so it was during that time, probably second or third grade, where I got a chance to put the goalie pads on for the first time, and really didn't look back after that. I knew after the first first time of being in the net that was something that I wanted to do. And it took a little bit of convincing between my dad and I, but eventually he had no other choice but to give in, and didn't look back after that.
Our conversation today is with Greg Fargo, who cut his teeth at Elmira College and moved on after a very storied playing career into coaching. We'll get into that in a moment, but first we want to take a break and hear from one of our sponsors. Sports in the 607 is presented in part by Empire Sports of the Southern Tier. Well, Greg Fargo wasn't always a college goaltender, but he paid his dues and worked his way into it. And let me share with you, and this is certainly a tribute to what Greg was able to achieve at Elmira College. Lowest goals against percentage, 2.04. Highest save percentages, 0.926. You coach, you win as a player. You won the ECAC West. You were named the most outstanding player. During that time, you had over 2,500 career saves in net, led the team in minutes played, and the last time that Greg Fargo and I did a live interview when he was a college player, the season had ended. We had tried to catch up multiple times, and we were really running against the time element because graduation was just around the corner. And Greg and I couldn't settle on a time, but we found a location, and it was in a parking lot behind a bank in downtown Elmira that we did our final interview. And the rest, I guess, is history in terms of moving on from the coaching standpoint. So, Greg, take us from Elmira College. Did you envision that you would someday maybe take that career as a college player into the coaching ranks, and then, as I remember correctly, you went off and got an assistant job at Canisius?
Yeah, that's right, Bob. No, like you said, I at the time when you're going through college and, you're really just trying to absorb, what you're in and really enjoy it day to day. I was loving my experience as a Soaring Eagle, and being in Elmira was really just focused on that season that we were in. And, as your senior year, Christmas passes and you come back for the second half of your senior year, you really start to think about what's next. And I remember, I was an education major at Elmira, really loved my experiences teaching and student teaching at the time. But it wasn't until I had some different conversations, I guess, with my coaches at Elmira that I even thought about coaching as a possible career path for myself. I got to, and to me, it was really the best blend of what I loved. I had a passion for teaching and had a deep rooted passion for the game, and so the possibility to be able to blend those two things together seemed like something that was made for me. And through the guidance of my coaches at the time, they were able to help me kind of get my foot in the door at Canisius. Dave Smith, who was a good friend, was a head coach at Canisius at the time, and still today is a great friend. But he was the one that gave me my first opportunity to jump into coaching, and I knew very shortly after that there was no looking back. I truly enjoyed every moment of my 2 years in Buffalo at Canisius, and that opportunity then shortly thereafter led me back to the Soaring Eagles back in Elmira as the head coach of the women's program.
So at Canisius, it was affiliated with a men's program, correct?
It was, yeah. I was a grad assistant there, and a full-time coach. It was great.
Well, being around guys all the time and knowing the ins and outs, and obviously the men's sport probably at the time was far more physical than the women. Were there any reservations in terms of knowing that the Soaring Eagles women's program would open up, but do you have any reservations about coaching women?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, truthfully, having had the experience of, being a player on the men's side for so long, that kind of being in my, all my experience was in men's hockey, and then having the opportunity to coach at Canisius on the men's side. Coaching on the women's side was never something that crossed my mind up until that point. And I think what I saw there was, with the opportunity that came up at Elmira, it was just an opportunity to be a head coach at a young age. You could easily see that the women's game was starting to take off. I guess my experiences as a student athlete, you got to see the newly formed women's program here at Elmira had won back-to-back national championships right off the bat. So right away, it was something that you were coming into a program that was very highly regarded, had a whole bunch of success prior to my arrival. And like I said, to be able to be a head coach at the age of 24 and grow with the sport and grow with the program at the time was something that was really appealing to me. So I hadn't thought about it a whole lot, but I think after again, it all comes back to conversations with past coaches, some different conversations with Coach Saul at the time. He was really the one that convinced me that this was a great opportunity.
Well, the program for the women at Elmira got started with Jamie Wood. Paul Nimitz-Carlson came in, a good friend of yours. Dean Jackson was the gentleman that you succeeded, and we had multiple interviews with our parent company, RLM Sports, with me handling the play-by-play. And Greg, I have to say, to this day, I'm very thankful to you for being so easy to work with and setting things up so that we could interview your athletes along the line. Want to talk more about Greg Fargo and his career, and that'll be coming up right after the break. Sports in the 607 is brought to you by Solutions Federal Credit Union. Greg Fargo, 4 years at Elmira as the women's head coach, and fans were a little disappointed that you decided to expand your horizons, but you certainly can't be faulted for that. And you get the call, and you take over the women's program at Colgate, and 12 years, and you were able to amass some pretty hefty credentials. And I'll only just touch upon maybe just a few things that came about there. But 12 years, as we said, an ECAC title, which was the first ever there, and you just continue to rack up those achievements. If I'm not mistaken, 3 conference titles. There were 7 20-win seasons. Greg, that had never been done before at Colgate. And in the back of your mind, when you took over the job first time, what were some of the immediate goals that you looked at in especially recruiting players to a program that had not enjoyed a lot of success up to that point?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think looking back at the time I spent at Colgate, it was I'm really proud of the program that we were able to continue to build upon there, and some of the ground that we were able to take. I think early on, when I arrived, Colgate had missed the playoffs for a number of years. It wasn't really a destination in women's hockey in terms of where some of the top players were looking to go at the time. But, and so when I took the job, I think I didn't know a whole lot about Colgate, if I'm being transparent. I got an opportunity to go on campus and meet some of the people, explore the community and see the facilities. And if for anyone that's ever spent any time on the campus there, it's a beautiful place and a great community. The academics are amongst the best in the country, and it was a scholarship school. And I really felt like there was a real opportunity there at Colgate to build upon what's already been laid out. And so we really just took an approach of putting our time and efforts into building from the recruiting model out. We initially spent a lot of time recruiting out of Canada, out of Ontario especially, where at the time and still today a lot of the top up and coming players are coming out of. We were able to build somewhat of a pipeline there. and what seemed like an overnight success in some ways wasn't. We were really just fortunate to have great people come in and chip away at stacking some wins on top of each other, and ultimately, to be able to accomplish some of the things that we did, that became almost expected on a year in basis.
Right.
When I first got there, those were some unimaginable aspirations for the program, and so really proud of how it was built, some of the success we were able to achieve, but more importantly, looking back on it, just really grateful and thankful to have the experience of coaching some incredible young women and people that I still stay in close contact with today.
Well, as a coach, it's up to you to mold these players into the success that they become. Let's look at some numbers here, fans. Greg, while you were there, highest winning percentage, winningest coach ever at Gate. You amassed 255 wins, 147 losses, and there were just 34 ties. And not that it was a distraction, but you had an opportunity to get involved with some outside activity, being a part of the coaching staff of Team Canada in the World's, the women's under 18. Talk about that experience and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think just incredible, in Canada, you grow up and you watch the World Junior Championships, you watch Team Canada, you dream of putting on that Canadian jersey at some point as a young hockey player, as most do. But to be able to represent Canada in that way behind the bench on the world stage was something that I'll never forget. I think every time since that I've had an opportunity to be a part of the Team Canada staff in any capacity, whether it's a camp or an event, I've tried to make that a priority, to give back to the game in that way, and hopefully create an environment where our players can achieve their goals at the highest level. That's certainly a career highlight for me.
And your team was able to achieve a silver medal. Do you have that displayed someplace prominently at home?
I got to be honest. I think since our move to New Jersey, I think there's still a lot of that stuff that remains in boxes somewhere. But it's with me. It's just not always out for display.
Greg Fargo is with us. We'll be back to talk more about hockey of all things right after the break. Sports in the 607, brought to you by On a Roll, Hanover Square Horseheads. Greg Fargo, hockey player, hockey coach, and now a professional coach with the women's program. And Greg, did that come as a surprise for maybe some of your associates that you, who seem to be entrenched for lifetime at Colgate, guiding a very successful program, bringing it up from the ground level to superior heights? Did you ever think in the back of your mind that someday you might move along with the evolution of women's hockey like that?
To be honest, Bob, it never really crossed my mind up until, the league became a real thing. I think for so long when I was at Colgate, and prior to that, playing in college hockey was the pinnacle of women's hockey. And for a lot of these players, that was the end game. And it wasn't until and granted, there were other leagues that had begun and started up and for short periods of time, provided opportunity for players beyond college. However, the PWHL, when it came about, it looked different, it felt different, and with such great support from the ownership group, it provided some real pathways for players beyond their college experience. And it wasn't until that time that it even crossed my mind. But I remember being at an event with Team Canada, and the league had just been announced that it was getting up and running, and a lot of the coaches there were jumping on board with the PWHL, and that's really when it started to cross my mind that one day this could be a possibility, and be something to aspire to be able to coach some of the best players in the world on an everyday basis was something that I just couldn't pass up.
Was it an easy decision for you? Did you have to maybe reach out to some close friends, some former associates to say, what do you think about this? Am I making the right move? Things of that nature?
Yeah, I think with any big life decision, you lean on those that are closest to you, those that you've leaned on in the past, and that was certainly the case with this one. Having been at a place like Colgate for 12 years, we felt really good about what we had built there, and the timing of it was right. The opportunity to be in a place like New York, build with this organization, and and to be able to jump into it at that time just felt like the right thing to do for me and my family. So, difficult decision for sure, because you're leaving something great behind. But at the same time, was excited by the new challenge, excited by the new opportunity that was in front of us, and haven't looked back at all for a moment.
Final thoughts with Greg Fargo coming up right after the break here on Sports in the 607. Sports in the 607, presented by First Heritage Federal Credit Union. So some final thoughts with Greg Fargo, who is now a member of the Professional Women's Hockey League. He's based in New Jersey. Tell us about your club, the Sirens.
Yeah, so like you said, Bob, we're the New York Sirens of the PWHL. Our team plays our home games here at the Prudential Center in New Jersey. But we're a New York-based team, and really excited about this year's group. I mean, it's with the expansion coming this past off season here, adding 2 more teams to the league, it's provided some opportunities for new players to come in. Since then we've gone through a draft. We've got a handful of new players coming straight from college. And so it's a really exciting time to be a Siren. I think we're all energized and eager to get this season number 3 underway, and build upon what we've started to build on here in New York. So,
well, I would imagine from the early days when you were a young goaltender at Elmira College, you have built, as you've moved along in your career, you've met a lot of associates who probably to this day you use for resources to kind of help you maybe mold the future for your program, and especially as a professional coach in a professional women's hockey league. It's so good to see. We see in my experience, I've seen a lot of very talented young women that have come through the Elmira program and through the ranks of their opponents and all of that. It's certainly good to see that this young man, who traces his roots back to Wolfe Island in Canada, was one of probably the best import to Elmira College as far as men's hockey is concerned. And now to see where you are at the pinnacle, at least for the moment, Greg. But thank you, my friend, for spending so much time with us here today. We could probably go on for hours at a time, but continued success, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Bob. It was great to see you and reminisce a little bit today. Thanks a lot for having me on today.
Thanks for joining us for Sports in the 607. We'll have another segment coming soon.